There we are. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network. Today, I am here with the incredible Faith Clarke for her premiere episode on a series we're calling Work Culture Design. Because work sucks, y'all.
We need to do something about it, really, since we all seem to have to do it.
But how do we fix it in a way that is meaningful and sustainable and accessible?
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to pick out over the next few episodes with Faith. I'm super excited about this series. I think culturally there's a lot of shifts that are in the water when it comes to work and how people perceive work and the importance of work. And I'm really excited to see how we can change things without, French Revolution. Because I feel like those are our options right now. It's either we
Burn
fix
it
some
out.
shit or we blow it all up. And since I prefer not to blow it all up, I think we can talk about how we fix things sustainably. So, Faith, let's talk first. I don't know how much of my audience knows you, so please introduce yourself. Tell us why you're here and what began this work for you.
Yeah. I am an organizational health specialist, and all that means is I'm interested in a broader spectrum of what it means to be healthy. And of course, the word healthy is a little bit politicized right now. But what does it mean to be healthy when you're a community of humans together, right? Not just the profits, not just the quote unquote productivity, but what does that mean? And I focus on teams and teamwork because I believe that teams are the perfect microcosm to practice some of the stuff that we talk about and not just be performative. But I got here at organizational health through the explorations of the organization of my household. I have three neurodistinct humans that I have the privilege of parenting and walking life with them. And that just means my oldest has autism and everybody else has a bunch of other things mixed in. And we toss in a fair amount of anxiety and sensory processing differences. And it's quite chaotic. And so we get to figure out
Here. It is quite chaotic, isn't it?
and you know what? Unlike in the workplace, the chaos apparently is not confined from 9 to 5. So we have
No.
practice. We have practice at figuring out how to be with each other in healthy ways, noticing when we slip into not being with each other in healthy ways, and figuring out this. How do we help everybody feel like they belong? Because in my house, I don't know about in yours, but in my house, everybody feels like they don't fit in. And I'm like, wait a second. If inside our home, where we are all committed to you feeling like you fit in, you don't feel like you fit in, then what the dickens happens when you get out into the places where you actually don't fit in? You don't fit in because
Right.
of your skin color, you don't fit in because of gender, you don't fit in because of neurodistinctiveness, you don't like it's wild. So my own people tease me that my business changes as my kids get older. Now that my kids are adults, I am thinking, okay, they need meaningful work. And yes, they have their own business. So that's cool. But how do we create workspaces should they choose not to run their own business, or even when they take on business clients? It's the same thing. You and I know that you have a business client and you are immersed into the culture of that organization. So
Yes.
my own exploration has been, how do I help people who want to shift the business landscape, shift it in ways that are not performative, that actually make a difference, so that my kids can have work. And if my kids get work, other people benefit, and that's cool too.
So you said neurodistinct, and this is conceptually something you and I have talked about before, but I would like for you to talk a little bit about neurovariance, neurodistinctiveness, as opposed to the more standardized terms?
Yeah. Well, I realized that I didn't like how it felt. And I believe everybody should use whatever terms feel good to them, right? But I didn't like how it felt to say my kids were neurodivergent. I was like, divergent from what? And I think that the thing that keeps coming home to me when we think about the body, when we think about just biology, diversity is the way life is, biology is, right? So
That's
I
correct.
actually, I actually think that neurodiversity is not even norm. That's just you are different from me and your neurology. I'm different from my kids. Neurodiversity is the thing. What happens though? What has happened is that between a combination of patriarchy, supremacy, and what we have maybe become used to seeing, we've built a world with support for what we consider to be the norm. Like a bunch of people, if you plot everybody's distinctive difference, that the diversity in a cloud, you'll just see there's a bunch of stuff that we think is okay and normal, and we've built supports into society for these things. It's okay for me to feel tired in the mornings and to get coffee. It's okay, you know what I mean? It's like there's a bunch of stuff that's okay, and we support that. Then there's a bunch of stuff that's clearly not okay, and we don't support that. And if we went through other models, we don't value it. We call it, disorder, whatever it is. And so for me, when I say distinctiveness, I'm just referring to the things that are outside of that cloud of range that we don't support, and calling attention to that.
And I think that's really important. We recently have been tossing around the idea that neurotypical is not actually accurate. There is no such thing as a typical neurotype. There
Yeah,
is a collection of neurotypes that are more prevalent than others, but there's nothing that's actually typical. And so it's really, really helpful, has been helpful for us in my household and in my work to really reframe that idea. If there is no typical and everything is just a variance, then making accommodations for variances isn't optional. It's just a need that everyone has. We just all have different needs. And that feels so much more attainable to
yeah.
me.
I think my daughter and I were talking yesterday about the idea of health. That's why I'm now like a little bit like, because there is no such thing as the healthy human being. Like we all have varying relationships with things that don't work, don't feel good, whatever, in our bodies, in our neurology, in our emotions, in our physicality. And we all have to build a relationship with ourselves and in our communities around that variation. It varies from body to body, and it varies with time, right? And I think that fundamentally for me in this work, it's building our capacity for being with variation. And it's variation
Yes.
that's different from human to human, but different in time, different in moment, different in context, and figuring out, I think as business owners, we have to figure out how much of that variation am I willing to support? And then being honest with people, it's really so much more nourishing when we say, I can't support you, not because I don't love you, because I don't think you're a valuable human. My environment does not have the infrastructure to support you. Right. And that's great and honest, because when you invite me in because you want to, build your diversity profile, and then you don't support me, that feels violent. And so I think that once we can ask these questions, like what variant are we supporting, neuro as well as any other. Like I keep thinking about if I'm PMSing, I'm different. I'm in perimenopause, I'm different. And what kind of differences are okay to be supported and nourished in my business?
And as I was talking about with Marisa Lowen yesterday, asking and being told no doesn't mean that the answer is no forever. It is just no right here, right now. So you can go and ask someone else and potentially receive a better answer. But what's key is the asking.
Mhm.
So, how do we go about asking for the things that we need when it comes to health?
I think within businesses, because like within the context of culture, I think Marissa and I also had some of these conversations recently, interestingly, because I found myself in a moment with her where I wondered if I was asking too much. You know, she and I have asked this, have had this conversation. Are people asking for too much? And we both agree, no, we need to be willing to ask for what we need. But what I realized is that is there is a context that is bigger than my ask, which is how do we respond to people who ask? And so the reality is
Ooh.
that we live in a culture where, for the unsupported needs, if you ask for help, you show yourself up to be a person who is less valuable. And
Oh,
when we become the organizations that say, of course, we want to support you, ask for what you need, we must know that everybody who has a need, it automatically does not trust that you will meet the need without judging them to be lower down on the value hierarchy. So when we are building cultures where we're saying people need to ask, part of that has to be building in a way of being that makes asking safe. That leadership, the people who are quote unquote higher on the privilege hierarchy for whatever reasons, even when you don't agree with it, have to be willing to be people who show their vulnerability and who are willing to ask in ways where it is okay for another person to say no, and it's not a reflection of that person's lack of commitment to the job and all this kind of thing. And then allow that the asking to happen from the other person, but maybe even inviting it.
okay. So, structurally, how do you do that? When you are in the leadership capacity, how do you create the vulnerable? Because as internet denizens, right, we all know the difference between real vulnerability and artificial vulnerability. And I don't trust artificial vulnerability. That's not sincere. And I'm not going to respond in the way that you expect that I will to that. So, how do we create true vulnerability in workplaces?
This is a lot. This is like a long game type of situation. As a business leader, you have to know that when you are creating a culture that's counter to the culture that is in the broader context, then you're playing the long game. You're going to do it in a systematic way, knowing that culture shifts slowly over time. And then you're going to choose a container for the development of that it's easier for you to say, okay, how do we build the trust inside here so that vulnerability can actually happen? I recommend doing this within teams. I think teams already, for teams that are interdependent, and when I say team now, lots of people will say, okay, I've hired on my VA, I've hired on my whoever these people are. And I'm like, that's cool. But to have a team, you first need to, you the leader need to kind of agree that you're inviting a bunch of people together to co-create with you. And so once you have that in your mind, that's my definition of team, people who are going to interact with you co-creating a thing. um, Once you have that container, then I think it's super important to set some agreements on some of these more icky things. How do we listen to each other? I think that there's some core skills that I tend to teach around paying attention not just to what people are saying, looking at who is speaking and who's not speaking, just noticing our dance with each other and figuring out how do we want that dance to shift. And then once we have those agreements, being super willing, giving a whole ton of permission to people to say that felt uncomfortable, and pausing things, because often I find leaders feel really uncomfortable with difficult emotions. But in the workplace, a place where we've not allowed people to express emotion, people are yes or no, sir, that kind of thing. When we start to say, I'm gonna create some space for vulnerability, emotions are gonna show up and a gasp. How do we be with people's emotions? Building the capacity and having people come in. Often these are not skills that people already have within that they apply within the workplace. So having people come in, whether it's consultants or whoever, to support the safety of the expressing of emotions and being with people in that process will sell this idea that it is safe to be yourself here. A friend of mine who's a DEI consultant in a large corporation, the way she did this was to have a weekly meeting where it was just a listening time. And it was on race. And it was, when did you notice something that triggered a, hey, is it because I'm Black here? And, what's the, and she just kind of had it every week. And it was not a place where people were receiving advice and telling. It was a place for expression and curiosity. And over time, the skills were built just in holding that space. It could be a designated time. It could be built into all the team meetings where you have a starting time and an ending time where we just listen to each other and be willing to express and then prove that we're not going to punish each other for our expression.
And I think that the thing that you touched on there is key, and we're not doing it. Part of work is that we do things, we fix things, we
Yeah.
solve things.
Yeah.
We cannot fix or solve systemic issues in a microculture. So all that we can do there is make a space available to process that information. But there is no fixing or solving of those things.
And yet, I agree that there's no fixing or solving of those things, but the systemic things show up in our conversations with each other. So, part of what we do in a microculture is to notice the threads of systemic issues that show up in the fact that I'm going to judge, I don't know, your Black glasses because I feel like, you know what I mean? And it's for me to notice. So building in my ability to notice that I felt some kind of way when you showed up with your Black glasses. Building in your ability to say, hey, your face looked kind of twisted there, Faith, when you saw me come in, and I feel worried that you are thinking it's my glasses and that means something about me. Being able to have that conversation is the thing that helps diffuse the systemic issues and kind of break them down within the microcosm and can give us some space for some healing.
And that's because the microculture is where we have the uncomfortable conversations, right?
I mean, the thing is that most of what happens at work that causes people to feel like they don't belong, like they're not supported, it's not happening in the big, like whatever your big events are along the work calendar. It's happening in the, this person didn't return my call. We're in a meeting and I put my hand up and the person gave me the side eye. There are these, that's what I call microaggressions. They're in these moments, corridor, the equivalent of the corridor moments and the meeting moments. I actually feel like the team meeting is the primary place of intervention. If the team is the primary unit of intervention, the team meeting or meetings are the primary place where we practice the skills of being more inclusive and helping people feel like they can belong and thrive. That's the place to do it.
Which is interesting because that's not how team meetings function
No,
in most work cultures.
of course.
When I think of a team meeting,
You're like,
what I
hell, you stay away from me with these more meetings.
right. And there's an agenda that we will not stick to. We
Mhm.
will go over time. I will, as someone who has a uncomfortable relationship with time, I'm going to sit there the entire time and feel like my time is not valued
Right.
because we're not following the agenda. We're not doing what we said we were going to do because I'm autistic and that matters to me. And at the end of it, I'm going to be so generally annoyed and angry that I want nothing to do with these people that I just sat around a table with for 90 minutes. So, how do we make meetings a place where we're actually developing culture?
I think we're going to talk about that in episode 2.
Okay.
I think what you're pointing to, right? So I've seen this happen a lot. Meetings are ineffective, so we have fewer of them. Because we have fewer of them, we have fewer intentional opportunities of togetherness, which make
Mm-hmm.
the meetings ineffective,
Correct.
right? So we have no practice at our being together. And I think the all leaders, I try to ask myself this question all the time: what's the point of this meeting? Can I be doing this in an email? Can I be posting a video? Can I send a voice note? Like, what's the point? I actually think that the real estate of meetings, synchronous together time, needs to be really carefully spent. And personally, for me, they should be strategic. They should be values infusing and like critical problem solving times versus just information giving out. Like, catch me in the corridor, grab me for 5 minutes. I love the 5 to 15 minute huddle, right? Faith, what you got? I got so and so. All right, cool. What, that's perfect for that. But for 90 minutes, 90
Ooh.
minutes for values infusion, for critical thinking, for people who've prepared something, or for explorations of hard things, for deep listening and that kind of thing. So
That's the short version, and I have never been so excited to take meetings apart and figure out how to write an agenda that works. So we'll be doing that one in 2 weeks.
and perhaps there might not be an agenda, which also leads me to
Oh,
if I'm in a meeting with Briar, then part of that, which means we're on the same team, part of what comes to constructing a meaningful meeting is understanding who we each are. And that allowance, but that comes from the trust. Like, your previous positioning says to me that these aren't people that you can trust to be on time. Neither do you feel like you have the power to change that. And it's different from Faith and Briar in a meeting where we like, okay, Faith has a very strange relationship with time too. And so, but not because I'm going to be monitoring it. I'm going to turn around. I'm like, what happened to 45 minutes, right? And so then what does the yes look like? We are not used to answering those questions at work. What we've done is give Briar the power, and then Faith conforms. And that's what we see on repeat in the workplace. And so when people start to say, how do we have more equity? And we say that's a great idea. What we must understand is that all our systems were built on inequity, injustice, and harming humans, basically. So we don't know, right? We're
right.
going to have to construct this.
So let's talk about other places in the workplace where this shows up that presents great conflict.
Well, so when clients approach me, they tend to be approaching me with any of the 1 million people related struggles that have come out of this question of how do we honor humans really? How do we have more of this people-centered workplace? And people aren't calling it that, but so it starts off with, wait, so how do we do the onboarding, since we're all onboarding? Everybody's onboarding, and yet it's like 80% of onboarding is ineffective. We're spending a bag of money on it. So how do we do the onboarding in a way that actually acknowledges the human that's being onboarded? I was in a situation where I was one of the colleges that I teach at. When they onboarded me, I was just like, you don't know that I know how to break systems? So I could be onboarded without being onboarded. Shh, I shouldn't say this so loudly. Because all I had to do was click through the videos at double speed and then look at the questions and then answer them quickly. So is that the purpose of onboarding in an organization where we are committed to honoring humans and helping them work well together in a way that causes them to feel like they can thrive? What does that mean for the way that we're onboarding people in responsive ways, noticing who they are, their individuality, and all that good stuff, right? So onboarding opens up an entire can of worms. And then what does it mean for compensation? Like, we've compensated people according to whatever it is that we've compensated them. And really, compensation, humans are a cost to the organization, right? So when we want to be profitable, that's why we're in business. So what does this mean for how we compensate? And then benefits. Somebody asked me about what's the deal with like equitable benefits packages. I was like, you're kidding. Because I am the person that always brings it back to what do the people need? What do this is not a formula. We are so committed to finding the formula. What's that great formula for equitable, compensation packages? And I'm like, if you're supporting me now, and I have adult kids, the daycare package doesn't support me. And maybe the gym added or the medical support, maybe, but then I want it out holistic, so what do the people actually need? So there's this question of equitable support that's always causes a ton of conflict. And then supports within, accessibility, but accessibility for who, right? And accessibility for what? Because like we hinted at earlier, some of the things that people have accessibility needs around, one, if you let people know you have a need, you immediately are disqualified from certain places and growth in the organization. But then two, the diversity of humans mean a diversity of accessibility supports, and how does the business afford the accessibility supports of all the humans? But then how does it handle supporting some and not others? These are not, these are complex questions. And then let's just throw in, it's a pandemic still, sort of, not really, but kind of. And whatever global issues are going on and how people's mental health and so on, so that causes the variance in how people can show up for work. Like the mental health crisis is affecting not just the people at work, but everybody's family is struggling. What does this mean? Faith can't do as much as she did. So I think that these are some of the questions that we're asking as a result of this newer philosophy around supporting humans in the workplace. Because once we said yes to that, they were like, whoa, the previous systems didn't try to support humans. So these questions weren't real, but now they're real. And what business owners are finding is that it's a mushroom complexity. We built the business machinery to have, international, so many employees. And now we're with wait, we have a small country trying to support. How does that work?
And I read an analysis this week that was talking about accessibility needs as being perceived as more and of an advantage than other people get, which I thought was really interesting. So, in addition to people feeling like they can't ask for the support they need, there will be other people around who think that your support gives you an advantage over them,
Yeah,
which is shocking to me, but makes perfect sense, right? If
right,
I'm getting something that you're not,
right.
then perhaps you're getting ahead of me. So it's that culture of scarcity
And competition.
and competition.
Right. This is why I think the team is the best place to work on that, because if you have a bunch of employees that feel competitive in that way with each other, that's a culture issue in the organization. And the place to shift from competition to cooperation, collaboration, that kind of co-creation, co-constructing with each other, that witness, that has to be with 5 to 10 people, because we have to break that down as, why do I feel like I have to compete with you? And yes, I could work on that in therapy, but it's actually there are things in my interaction with you that prompt that in me. And if we care enough about it, I always talk about workspaces of care. I have to care that you feel like you're in competition with me to just be able to listen well. And so my son, this is great when you have teenagers. So there's like 2 or 3 generations between us. And so he'll say something and it triggers me. And now he knows that it triggers me. He's like, no, that means, and he tells me whatever the translation is because of the current modern language thing. So he cares that it would trigger me. He wants to communicate with me in a familiar way. So what he does is act as both communicator and translator while letting me know I heard you when you said that thing triggered you. I think all of those types of things are massively important in this whole what's his name? John. he's a researcher, African American researcher, but he calls it constructing the new us. And I think in every workspace, there has to be these skills that we are constantly using that's causing us to construct this new us of collaboration, cooperation, which is really what inclusion is among difference.
So why should I care? How do we create a culture where and okay, again, y'all, autistic. When I think of work, it's a revolving door. And there is little motivation for me to get to know people on a personal level because outside of work, they're not going to be my friends. That's important to me. I don't want them to be my friends because if I'm at a job, I want to keep that separate from the rest of my life. So there's very little impetus for me to get close or care about these people beyond a surface level. We've obviously cultivated that in terms of
Because of how
workplace.
toxic the workplace is. Like we
That
have
is correct.
right.
But how do we then flip the switch? How do we make people in the team care about the team?
So the thing though is that while you don't care much in the broader workplace, if the team is designed in a certain way, you have a certain superficial level of care because of the shared agreement around whatever the task is that we're about. And I think that can be leveraged because we all know I worked with a team many years ago, and we did I helped the team leader do a fantastic job at this big event that they were doing. And at the end of the event, what did the team members say? That was hard. We'll never do that again. The reality is that the cost of doing well on teams where people don't feel integrated and connected with each other is so high that when people have a choice, they opt out of it. Right. And so the smart business owner, so for, yeah, the members of the team, what will make them care? Change the environment so that their hackles don't need to be up all the time. And yes, this is a long game. No one trusts that the businesses are going to sustain the care because
Why should I?
right, we have like hundreds of years of history, right? So this is a long game, and really it's an ethical issue at this point in time. But what we're seeing on the business landscape is that it is a revolving door, and businesses are losing money because of the lack of care. And the mental health and physical health crisis is not just something that's being experienced individually, but business costs are going up because humans aren't being nourished. Forget nourished, just not getting enough sustenance to kind of break even. Forget the money, right? So the fact that this is happening means we have to be strategic. And within the team, we actually have an opportunity because people have already signed on for a certain kind of collaboration. And we'll see when people get into, like, people call it flow, whatever, when team members actually work together in a way that they don't even have to talk to each other. Like I've seen teams work where they change strategy in their minds and everybody knows. When people get into that kind of flow with each other, it feels so good that they want to do it again. And that causes people to want and care and so on. So I think that when we have what we have in the majority of spaces where people are apathetic, that's a result of the toxic culture. It doesn't change overnight, but we can, within small pockets of spaces, work on this. And I think it really is tied to the leader and then the microculture they focus on creating.
We keep talking about this as a long game, which it absolutely is. And one of the problems I think a lot of neurovariant folks have is that because we have weird relationships with time, it's difficult to see progress without like milestone markers. So, what are some signposts that we're getting things right here?
That's a great question. I think like I keep coming back to listening and talking. It sounds like drink water and and eat vegetables. Um, but the to be listened to is so close to being loved. Somebody said, I have to go find who said it, that we can hardly tell the difference. I think that
Mm.
the core human need to be heard is the thing that if people are saying no one's hearing me, that we're not moving the needle. And so this what are the intentional strategies, steps that we're creating in our space to practice our listening? Forget about the talking for a bit, just practicing our listening. And the proof of the good listening is the person who says, I feel heard, I think, right? And of course, we have to put in place structures that help people interpret each other, because if you're this way and I'm that way, then it's hard for me to interpret. So there is this some support and some coaching that's needed. But I feel that if we're not doing that there, it's not your DEI policy. It's definitely not hiring a more diverse workforce. It is this kind of like, they're absolutely right now in a homogenous, let's say all white or all able, quote unquote, typical, whatever, a homogenous space. There's still people right there who don't feel like they're heard. And if we can't let the people who are all the same feel like they're heard, forget about having people who are quote unquote different feel like they're heard, right? So that for me is the beginning.
I was watching a John Oliver piece on AI, and he said that one company's hiring software had determined that the most qualified candidates were named Lance and had played high school lacrosse.
Oh dear God.
Which, I mean, really sums up hiring software. No, but it
Oh
really typifies, even with a bunch of Lances who played high school
God.
lacrosse, there's still going to be a feeling of not being heard.
Yeah.
Okay, so listening sessions, that's great. What else do we do to increase feeling heard?
Mhm. I have a set of core skills that I believe that people need to be practicing on the regular. And so I think that being heard is a cycle of noticing difference. I think I have to build inside of me my ability to notice my response to whatever the difference is. So noticing that I have a response to difference, noticing what that is, my own noticing and then moving towards difference. So I use the analogy of being at the high school party, and somebody is not dancing and they're standing in the corner. So one, I need to be able to notice that person is standing in the corner. Then I need to notice that I have some kind of relationship to that, like I have some thought about that. Then I need to move towards the person in the corner. People have said to me all the time, Faith, I have no idea what autism moms experience. I'm like, come over. This is not a theoretical thing. You don't need a book. You need to come over to my house, knock on the door, and they're like, "But what if you don't let me in?" I'm like, "Face that. That's a risk factor. But if I let you in, you will see." And so, go. What's our ability to go over to difference, and then be with it? Like be
Mm.
there. Just be there, right? And then, what's our ability to integrate difference into the whole? Either be back here or expand our definition of party so that being on the wall works, right? So how do we take
Right.
framework of noticing my relationship to difference, going over to difference, and then integrating it into the goal? How do we take that into our various contexts, right? So what's happening in the meeting, when we're in this listening, if I'm really doing my listening, both my listening to myself and to the others, I should notice there are some people who aren't talking. There's some people who are saying the same thing all the time. There's some people who, even though they talk, the decision is different from what they've said. I should notice that our ability to integrate people's different points of views into a solution that works for everyone isn't that's not a strong point. And then we have to work on that. As a leader, I would be like, how do we slow ourselves down enough to persist so that we come up with something that has no, it's not a win-lose. it is a win-win. So all of those kinds of things, that's for me is that those are the kind of mechanisms that are needed in every context to be able to help people say, yes, I have been heard. It shows up in our decisions, it shows up in our workflow, it shows up in how I feel when I've had the conversation with my person I report to, etc. I go off on the party analogy a bit sometimes. So
No, but because I keep coming back to it, like there's so many options there, right? I can decide to force that person into dancing at the part because they've chosen not to dance. So it it's an invitation. But if it's an invitation with an expectation, then it's force. I can allow that to be okay and allow that to be a part of the party. But really, all of this comes back to me and how I choose to respond to the person in the corner. So, yes, I can see why you like that analogy because there's a lot to unpack there.
I mean, we don't even know why this person isn't dancing. We're there saying, oh, wallflower, shy, whatever. And the person is just saying, no, my knee. Or the person is just saying, in this corner, the bass rhythms are so gorgeous that it settles my sensory system. I want to be in this corner because it's the most settling thing for me. Or the person is like, I love people watching. We have no idea why people go into the corner, in which case, go over there and be with that so that you have a perspective on that before you're even figuring out what to integrate. We're busy like, hey, bring the party over here, and that might not be the solution. It really is about how we go and kind of listen well to what's happening.
And I think that the more that we lean into possibility, the more that we open ourselves up to being okay with the variance.
Yeah. I think that the one of the first, the two core like, I don't know, experiences I invite people into before we get into the mechanics of defining, of becoming this, of implementing culture. And one of them is the capacity building that we've been talking about. What are these skills? But one of them is you said open up to possibilities. There's a creation of this aspirational culture that we want, that many of us haven't really seen or experienced. And I think that being willing to say, I don't know how to do this, but I want to work in a place that this is how we are. Like, and having all the voices, because I cannot imagine, I can't define the culture that Briar wants. I can define the culture that Faith wants. And then if Faith and Briar are in the same space, then we have a conversation about what does that culture look like where Faith is not having to say no to Faith, to say yes to Briar.
Mm.
And that's not, we are so accustomed to that yes no type of scenario that there is, I'm like, can we believe that there is a space where we are in that yes yes? And yes yes doesn't mean everybody gets exactly what they want, but it is about, we have these agreements that we all sign on to, that we all feel are nourishing, that allow us to have the dance of Briar then Faith, or Briar and Faith do the jig, or Briar leads and Faith then responds to what Briar wants. We're dancing again. Like, but there is no conflict between Briar and Faith in this dance. We just know, right? And Faith can handle which show. Oh, I was watching the amazing, what was it? The Inspector, I don't know, Attorney Wu. I don't know if you've seen.
No, not yet.
Attorney Wu, autistic judge. But Attorney Wu can handle 57 seconds or 54 seconds of hand holding. So Attorney Wu and her boyfriend, are, like,
so autistic.
1, 2, and so he's feeling the tension rise in her as he's holding her hand, but they're figuring it out. And she wants to, and she gets to 40 seconds and she pulls her hand back and he's not vexed. And, and I think there is this, how do we be together in ways that feel completely nourishing and loving.
I think I want to wrap here with talking about how we do that. So, when Briar and Faith dance, there's a lot of synchronicity
Mhm.
because we are fairly similar. How do we dance with people with whom we have nothing in common?
I think we have to believe that we can. I think we have to believe that our structures around what dancing looks like um, are our own, and so we can create together. Saw an Instagram reel where a physical therapist was the one in the dance off, and he's like, then he starts to do the hand exercises, and that's his dance move, and it was quite accepted. So how do we listen to each other well enough, and back to the listening, so that we know what's everybody's thing, and then how do we put that together to make a mosaic of what the shared communal thing is going to be? Piece of glass here, piece of fabric there, but we're still creating this picture that's the shared goal. So how do we get along with people that are different from us? Well, they're just different from us. The question is, what's the goal and where are we going, and how does everybody's difference complement that goal? And then what's the way we relate? Now, if your difference is constantly triggering me, but I love you, versus I'm going to judge you for it. Briar is an ass. It's completely different from Briar is really committed to time, and it makes her anxious. Like her whole cortisol is going up in her body, and I don't want that for her. So I'm going to, put myself in another space, set up a timer for Briar, whatever it is. But if I'm doing that because I'm supporting you, then it's a totally different thing from if it is that I'm just like, your difference just so pisses me off. So I think it has to get to the fundamental. What are we valuing here? A person that I don't get along with, what's going on in terms of their difference in mine, and how am I interpreting that? Usually I'm interpreting that in some kind of judgment against myself, usually, but I can't admit
Mm,
that. So I just toss it back over to you. Blame you for my own,
right,
you know,
right.
there's this
Always.
going on there.
Okay. This is
So
going to
we
be
opened it up and
so much fun.
we
So
opened
much
it up
fun.
and left it messy. Can I just have a closing thought? I think this work is work for people who already have decided that the systemic patriarchal supremacist systems that our workplaces have been built on are not good for us. If you're still asking the question, what's the ROI on inclusion and belonging? This actually isn't work for you. Stay with the external markers. There are tons of tests and external markers that we can get check marks on as good school children. We get check marks and we get an A for that don't move the needle on inclusion and belonging. We've seen this already over 30 years, 50 years of some of this stuff. And it's not a critique on the organization to say that isn't something we can do, because there are a ton of people who will work with you that are similar to you. And I think for the organizations that want to shift the needle, know that it's a long game and shift it in small pockets. The bus is on the road. People's lives are dependent on it. Salaries have to be paid. Products, like all the things have to happen. But within small pockets, we can make the changes and be incrementally, making a difference. So we can be patient with ourselves as we recreate how to do business and life together.
And I think that's, at least for us here, the goal to figure out how to recreate how we're doing business and life in a way that is fundamentally accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
So, we'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about meetings. This series is going to explore all of the ways in which work culture can be designed. And whether you own a business or are an employee, I encourage you to follow along on this journey and get the help you need to figure out what's going to make work less like work for you.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Thank you, Faith, for being here today. Y'all, thank you very much for being here. You can find us now officially, it's official, at neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. Paid subscribers get a bunch of things, including some private streams with me. You get to help build out our accessibility. Really, though, what we're creating together here is a community where we believe that this work is possible. And I think more than anything else, that's the goal, is to do this life thing together.
That's right. That's right.
All right, y'all. We will see you again next time. Thank you for watching, and you have an amazing day.